Hello everyone. Welcome to Coding Bootcamp 2023 from Embarcadero. My name is Ray Konopka with Ray's Software, and today I'm going to be doing a deep dive into creating custom VCL styles. So let's get started. So to start, we're going to cover some basics just to make sure everybody's grounded with how VCL styles work, how we add them to our application to customize the appearance of that, how we do that in project options. We'll go over that very quickly. We'll also look at how do we dynamically change the style at runtime, so we can switch between different styles if we want to give our users that ability. That's very popular in current applications to support both light and dark styles. Gives us a way to do that. But the meat of this session is really talking about customizing a style. So there's a preset set of styles that come with Delphi and C++ Builder, but we want to look at, well, what if we want our own? What if we want to make some changes? And we can go as deep or as light as we want with how simple the customizations we might want to do, or really create a completely custom from the ground up style. This session is going to cover everything that you need to know in order to do any of those variations that you might want. So we're going to look at customizing based on color. We'll look at simple element customizations. We'll look at complex style designing them from scratch. What are some things that we need to do? Along the way, I'll be sharing a lot of tips and strategies. If you want to attack building a custom style, what are the things we need to watch out for? There are some gotchas. Things may not always do what you think they will, and that's based on kind of the limitations of styles, but then also just how they're implemented. And we can take a look at all of those. So, first and foremost, we're talking VCL styles. There is also an FMX style. It's very similar, but it's a little bit more complicated. You have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to an FMX style just because of how FMX, that component library, was created. That's not what we're covering in this. Really, we're talking about VCL applications, and we customize the style by using the application appearance tab inside of the project options. And so we'll look at what that looks like shortly. The key thing is once we add or have access to some styles, how do we change them or switch between them in our application? And we use the style manager in VCL.themes unit to do that. And we can reference the style names property. It's a class property, so it's always there. It gives us a generic array of styles, they're strings that we can get the names, and then we can use either set style or try set style to change it. Basically, we're telling the style engine, hey, use this new style and render everything with whatever the definition of that style shows. So let's just get right into the meat of things and switch over to Rad Studio. I have Delphi 11 here, Rad Studio 11. I have a sample application, which is simply just taking a bunch of different VCL controls, dropping them on the form, populating them with certain things. I have tab controls, edits, checkboxes, radio buttons, of course, common UI elements, toolbars, and so forth. And what we'll see is we need to add some styles to this. So I'm going to go into Project Options, locate the Application Appearance tab, and we're going to see a list of various styles that Rad Studio knows about. And these are styles that are listed inside of the styles directory, and that styles directory is located over in your public documents folder, Embarcadero Studio 22 or whatever version of Rad Studio you happen to be using, and it has the list of styles. And the ones that have VSF are the VCL style files. And so there's a bunch that are listed in here. And if you install any outside or third-party styles, they're going to show up in here as well. So going back over to the IDE, let me go and just pick some. Notice that I'm in this first section, which is Embarcadero's High DPI optimized. We're going to want to pick styles from this set. And the reason for that is that they're the most current and they support different renderings when you're on different scaled systems. So if you're at 100 100% DPI system, great, 96 DPI. But if you're running at a high DPI 4K display and you're running Windows at 200%, you're going to want certain glyphs and elements of the style to be higher res, and that's what the high DPI optimized will tell us, that that supports that. So let me go and pick some others. I've got Iceberg and Lavender Classico. It's a pretty standard style. We've got other Windows 10 themes, and I'm going to pick the Windows 11 modern versions as an option. Notice that we have another section for Embarcadero which has a bunch of other styles. These are the older styles that have not yet been uplifted to support high DPI. You can still use them. The challenge will be is that if you run it on a system that's in a high DPI like 200%, radio buttons might not look as good, checkboxes, things that need to scale properly when you get larger may have some anti-aliasing showing up, it's some pixelation and so forth. Third-party vendors will show up with based on their company name. For example, Ray Software has a number of styles that can be added in. I'll talk about color impact a little bit later, and then any other external ones would be in the list. So we're going to just start with these for now, and then default style tells us which one of the ones that we've selected, and all of these get embedded into the resources of our executable, so they're immediately available. We can also deploy a style as a file and dynamically load that if that's something you want to do. So we're going to start with the Iceberg Classico. We're going to keep that nice and simple. I'll hit save. And one of the things that's very nice with Rad Studio 11 is that we can actually see that style applied at design time. In previous versions, that didn't happen. You had to run the application to see it. I'm still going to run it because we want to see dynamically switching it, and there's some other aspects that we want to talk about. So let me go ahead and start this application up. And as you can see, we have all the common elements. Hot tracking on the tab styles is all in there. I've got data where controls, we've got edits, checkboxes, radio buttons, the hot tracking of the buttons, toolbars, tool buttons look a certain way. To switch, I'm populating this combo box. We'll look at how we do that in just a moment, but I'm going to first go ahead and change it. And by just changing it, we're applying a new style, which looks similar but different coloring. I can go and switch to the Windows 11 modern style. Great. I can even switch to the dark style, and we get everything picks up for that. And you'll want to check everything out, like how do the menus look when you have that different style. I'm going to go back to the Iceberg Classico. Some things that, because we want to make sure that drop-down menus work. That's a cool, important thing to show. Do the tabs work right? But another area, there's two, is one, if we have a custom dialog, do we want the dialogues to have the same style as the main form? We can choose to, the default is yes, but in this example, I'm actually specifying that the dialog should use a different style. Just a choice that I decided to play with and show you how to do that. It's actually quite simple. Open dialogues, if you decide to have the open by default, your common dialogues will change to the old style so that they can have and share in the same look and feel. I'll talk about how we get rid of that to show just the new common dialogues, and what, it's all about sacrifices, because if we select one, we don't get the styling, and if we do, we make the change. So let's stop that for a sec. Let's go into the code and see where I've made this change for that, populating that combo box. And that's done with by using the style names property off of the T-Style Manager, iterating over that and adding them to the combo box. And then looking at the active style name. So this is whatever one gets started up at startup. When you put in default style, that is the active style, and we get the name off of that, and we can pre-populate the combo box to match. When it comes time to change the combo box, we simply set the try set style. We call that to try it. We do the try because if we were to allow typing in a name or loading it from a file, but the file doesn't exist, this may not work. So the try is a little bit safer rather than raising an exception if it won't load properly. The things that I have commented out here talk about some of the things I talked about before. And this all has to do with, okay, do we want the common dialogues to do a different style? And so if we were to, right now they came up with the Iceberg Classico, because that was the style that I picked and I showed it. But I could force that to actually show as Lavender Classico or any other style that I wanted. Likewise, this use the system style as a default is interesting if you want your app to look like Windows regularly, but you want a style and individual control. And that's one of the things that was really cool and added into 10.4 was per control styling. So you can have an application look with one style, even the default Windows style, but then pick a button or two or some checkboxes or whatever you want using a custom style to really hone in and get an interface that you want. I'm not going to show that one here, but I will talk about the next two. The other is sometimes depending on the menus. One of the things that you get, and I'll show this before turning it on, and then I'm also going to show what happens if we turn off this style hook, and we're going to remove the dialogues from the style hooks. There's built-in style hooks that Delphi and the VCL provide to customize and make certain control elements work properly with styles. The common dialogues is one of them. That's why when we brought up the common dialog for open, it looked like the old style open dialog, but it did match the style. I'm removing that now from that hook, and if we go and run this again, what we're going to see is in the open is now the traditional open dialog. Now, it doesn't match your style, but maybe it's more important to have the new open style or open, the framework format of that dialog box for your application. You can choose that. The other thing that you'll note is that there's no shadow behind the window that you would normally see when you bring up a window inside of I'm running Windows 11 here, and so you see a drop shadow and so forth. When you run as the full VCL style, you don't get that. One way to get around that is that you take off the border, and you can remove that from the style elements, from the form border style, or you can do it through here, and we can just say we're going to use the system style. And what this does, if I run the same application again, you notice that we have the drop shadow now, but our title bar doesn't match the style. It's back to what it should be. And the other thing that you'll note is that depending on the style that you pick, the menu may not actually style properly. And it's based on how the style is set up and what that connects to. So you have to try that on a per case basis. For example, I believe if I pick the Windows dark style, it gets messed up when you take that off for this root bar. Now, there's some hacks that you could do to try to fix that. One option is to use an action bar with action menus. It's an older control, but it doesn't use the main menu because the main menu is tying to the non-client area of the window, and that's what causes that behavioral change. If you happen to be using a light style, then it's kind of okay. So just want to let you know what those options and things are. Okay. We've got various things here. Let's talk more. Let's switch over and talk about some customizations. Already talked about each of those. So that's one level. We're customizing kind of the way our themes work in our application, but now we're going to get into the actual themes themselves. So the next thing that we want to talk about, well, we have to, when we're talking about customizing a style, we have to talk about the Bitmap Style Designer. That's how we do the customizations, aside from the coding things I talked about. This is where we can get access to the individual style elements that are used for the various components and controls in our application. The Style Designer is broken up into 5 different sections. There's an object section which is broken up by control, and it defines the pieces that make up the style, the various elements. Then you have the images section, which defines all the source images that are going to be used to basically represent what that control will look like when this style is used. And then the three remaining sections are all related to colors. Even though it says fonts, it's really font color and not font itself. It's be cool, and it looks like you could change it, but it's really not supported in the VCL styles. But it is important that we go in there and we change the font styles, as I'll show. Colors are for control elements, and sys colors are when you load a VCL style into your application. We're very familiar with CL button face, for example. We've been using that since Delphi was created. You have this, the default color of the form is CL button face, and that comes from the system. Well, if we're switching out and we're using a custom theme, the CL button face, we should really set that to be what we think the new form base color is, or the color of a button, which is how it was really designed to be, how that fits. So there's some extra work that we need to do to fix all of that up. So what's this process? If we wanted to customize a style, what do we need to do? Well, you have your choice. You could create a brand new style, or most of the time, certainly when getting started, you're just going to create a copy of an existing style and then tweak it. Fix it up, change it the way you want to, and work with that. And then again, based on licensing and things of what styles you're using, the ones that come with Delphi, you can free and go and change that, make a copy, and make a new one out of it. If you're looking to do more than that or try to create them commercially, you're probably going to create from brand new. We're going to update the author information, the style name. This is what shows up inside of Delphi and C++ Builder in order to see who provides it. So it groups it by vendor. It also tells you the name so that you can identify what style. That style is also used to load it dynamically once it's added into your resources of your application. And then the key thing is we're going to customize. The general thing you almost always will do is you'll be customizing and updating the source images. And then as necessary, updating the fonts and colors. You'll update the object settings for various features to make sure you're using and extracting the right image, the source images, to render your control. And then save the style, and we're going to add a new style to the appearance settings by putting it in the right spot. That directory that I showed earlier for your version of RAD Studio. So selecting a base style, what do we want to start with? Well, default styles are Delphi version specific, so I highly recommend you pick the one for the version that you're working with. Generally speaking, styles for version 11 right now, 22 will work just fine for 10.4, 10.3, and all the way down. There's some things may not be supported perfectly when you get some older versions of it, but generally for most recent versions of RAD Studio, we're good with using 22 as a base, or whatever the latest version of Delphi you happen to have. The key thing is I highly recommend starting with those high DPI ones. Don't start with one of the older styles because you're going to want to support the higher DPI, make sure it looks good when you're running at 200% on a machine. We certainly want to do that. So I've listed those standard ones that come with the high DPI support. And then we're going to, the biggest impact you have with a style is in the source images that we create. These are the pieces, the building blocks that make a style look like it does. So if we really want to change it, we're going to change those source images, and that will have a huge impact on what we want. What is neat is that you can support there's multiple images can be loaded into a style, different source images, and in theory you could create an individual image for every control element that you would need. name it, load it up into the style, but you're never going to do that. You could break it up into sections if you wanted, but as you'll find, for a checkbox, for example, there are several images that are needed just to represent a checkbox because of the states. You have the checked and the unchecked and the grayed. You have the checked highlighted, the focused, hot tracking. You have the checked depressed, that it's pressed, and don't forget the disabled states. And for each one of those, so you have lots of those. You want those all to be together so that you can make sure they all look right, that they have the same size and so forth, rather than in separate files. One of the key things, speaking of checkboxes and radio buttons, there's a subset of images that you need to create multiple versions for it. And it's recommended for high DPI support is to support at least these three: the 100% version, the 150% version, and the 200% version. There is the opportunity to create a 300% version. It's not necessary at this point based on the scaling that is used in the application. The VCL will pick and extrapolate an appropriate style and sizing based on the closest one that's there. So what I'm going to show now is to create a new style based off of the classical version that we were just looking at, but I'm building it for a client that happens to be a floral shop. So we're going to make a floral shop classico style that touches on several of these different things. Most importantly, we're going to customize the images. So let's take a look at what we need to do for that. So I'm going to bring up the Bitmap Style Designer here and go ahead and click open and start with, let's see, what do I want to start with here? I'm going to start with the Slate Classico. Got to go find it. You could start with any of them, but I'm going to start with the Slate one just so that it gives us I know what the coloring will do that I need to make it work. The key thing is, the first foremost, we're going to update some of this information. So I'm going to go in and you can put whatever you want. I'm just going to put Ray Software, and we can change this to rays.com and then change this to Floral Shop Classico and then hit enter. Keep the version number at 2. It actually is not the version number of your style, it's the version number of the VCL Style framework that is recognized. So if you go and change it, things don't work right. So that's one tip. Second tip is, if you go, next thing we want to do is save this as a different file. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to call it Floral Shop Classico, and you can go ahead and save it in the same directory, the 22 styles there. I'm going to go and save that, and then if you go and reopen it, so if I open up something else and I come back and I open up the Floral Shop one of the things you'll see is, sometimes this shows the wrong version information. It doesn't show the right, it'll default to showing Embarcadero. If that happens, just click on another object and click back to the top and it will show it correctly. So I'm going to close this down for the moment because I'm not talking about the objects yet, but I do want to talk about the images. So one of the things that I can this helps is you can see I have 3 different source images in here, and if we click on one, you can see where, because we already saw the Classico style, this is where all of those pieces are. Now it's a little hodgepodgey where it's kind of all over the place. Things are somewhat grouped, but not everything is grouped that well. And then when you get to the 150% ones, this is just the images that are scaled. Not every control element does get scaled. Personally, they should be, but that's actually a limitation in the way Windows implements its styling when it goes to high DPI. I'll mention that a little bit later. in more detail. But you can see we have all these rendered these images, and if you run the test button here to test it, it opens up a dialog that applies all of those test images. And so we can get a preview of what everything looks like by running that test, which is really powerful. You'll use this a ton when you're customizing it. But what I want to do is I want to basically keep the general look of the borders and the buttons to be the same, but I want to change the coloring, which is a really common thing to do. So the first thing I need to do is export these styles. And so if I go and pick on these and do my image export, so I'll start with the first one, and I'm going to navigate to my my graphics directory because I have to switch over. I'm going to use sessions, VCL Styles, export. We're going to pick this folder, and then what's kind of interesting is that it will export all the files for you. You don't have to set in each export one. It just exports all the files, the images, and it's there, which is fine. So we're going to keep that there. I've added those, their PNG files over on that side. I'm going to switch to my Photoshop. And so I'm going to go ahead and open, and I've already set up to go to that directory. So now I've just exported these. So I'm going to bring up all of them. I'm only going to change the first one to start just for time here. I don't need to clip it, but I will zoom in on this a little bit. And you can see that this is an image. It's a PNG image. So there's transparency around everything. But that's how it's broken up. And it's the better organized your source images are, if you're going to build custom ones, the better and easier it's going to be to set it all up. But for now, we're just going to be colorizing some things. So really quickly, what I'm going to do is go into my image and my adjustment. And what am I looking for? Hue and saturation. This is all being done in a Mac, so you won't see that there. And I'm going to change my hue to be 57. And you can already see a preview of how we've changed some things. So I'm going to go ahead and pick that. And then I'm going to go into my adjustments, my photo filter, and change that to the filter to be warming. Which one do I want? I picked filter of violet. So that's coloring all of the grayer areas. And then I'm going to, and I can apply the same things to the other ones if I so choose, but for time I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and save that file back to that directory, and let's go see what this looks like when we go back into Delphi. So I now want to update this image, and so pick the image that we want. Now this is done individually, so here's my export of what I had. This is the one I just changed, so let me go and pick that. There's my new coloring. I'll open that up. It kind of shows you what it's going to look like with the transparency applied. I've never modified any of these. This is simply what I use. Go ahead and click that, and now we can see we've made a change. I'm going to go ahead and save my style and run it. And you can see that we've picked up. We've got some brighter blue buttons. We've got the little green coming in from the styles there. We've got toolbar buttons. Here's a dialog. So not too bad. As you start navigating, we'll see some other things that come through, like oh, there's that gold is creeping up in certain things. How we've got over here that oh, that bar is a little bit different. That's not the one we want, and so forth. List views, but overall pretty easy to change and make some customizations. All right, let's kind of wrap and talk a little bit more what's next when we go through some of this stuff. So one of the things that we need to check for, I kind of touched on it, where you have that the tabs on there. We're still bringing the yellow in from the other side, but we do need to go through and look at the various color properties that are used inside of the style, and we'll do that in just a moment. The source images describe most everything, however, not everything, and so we do want to catch some of those gaps. Then, so what I want to do now, let's go back to the style here, and I'm going to bring the style back up. And some things that are kind of interesting is, the scroll bar coloring, like these are gray still. Like, where is that color coming from? And there's other little elements that can come into play that you're not quite sure who's driving that. And the additional ones, for example, there, button color, like the button backgrounds of all of this. One of the so where all those show up are in the different sections down below. So font colors shows you the coloring of a background of a given text element or a given style element, like button. So our buttons look like this. So the black actually works okay. If this was a little bit darker purple, we would probably want to switch this to be white. So we would go in and you pick the element and you go and change the color and you would see it. We want to go through and make sure that every one of these works and looks appropriate, because this is where you would see that, oh, I'm using white text on a light gray background. That's not going to look very good. You won't be able to read it. Black on a dark background. Here are the colors. So here's where the blue is. If we wanted to change that, we could certainly do that if that was something that was important, although the blue works. The rest of these all look okay. There's no yellow or striking colors. System color is the one we want, because a lot of things use CL highlight, for example, and we want that to be match our theme better versus the yellow. Now maybe you like the yellow, but just to show you what you do, I'm going to make that change. So I'm going to change the highlight to 165, 232, and 143. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and that's matching the green color that was used elsewhere. And then for the button face, we have this is the gray color that's showing up in various pieces. Like the toolbar was gray, the scroll bar corner was gray. That's coming from this. So we're going to change the button face color to be more like our form color, which is 227, 218, 240. Hence our light purple. Go ahead and change that. Now I go ahead and save this, and we can see that, like, oh yeah, the scroll bars look right, and the various gaps, the tabs. So there's our green, that shows up better. Some things you can't control. For example, like the background of the scroll of this list box area, it's a control box, so it doesn't fit in as well. It's a scroll box basically, and so that you have to do some extra stuff beyond that. But at this point, everything is generally looking quite good. One of the things that to really get an idea of what all the colors do and what they control, included with the download materials for this, I have a let me go and grab it. There's a style that I call color impact, and it's a pure custom. You would never use it in an application, but it's very useful to see what it does. So color impact, you go and you put it in your styles directory, you go and pick it, and then once you load that up, what you'll see is that I have different colors for all of the different elements that are in here. And what it does is when I go and run it, you can see that, oh, there's one of the orange colors is around the scroll boxes. The combo boxes have different colors that control the background based on the state of it. Same thing with the list boxes. As you go through each of these elements, you can see where they are. And having that, for example, that gray color, that there's a peach color that controls that. So I could go into the floral shop one, find that particular version and change it so that it would be more purple than the gray. A lot of detail, a lot of things to look at that. But that's again, if you're really getting into that, you find a gap, load this up and see what color value it's coming from, and then go back into the various control elements and find out, oh, well, okay, button face and shadow, those are there. Tweak them, try it again, and you're good to go. All right, next up, want to dig a little bit deeper into customizing an element. And so, yes, the source images allow us to change the appearance and how that looks, but we can do much more. We can actually make things bigger than they are, like a title bar. That's one of the things we're going to change here. Is the title bar in that the Classico style is okay, but it's rather small. And in today's Windows, they're much larger. They have easier buttons to hit. We should kind of make it fit and be closer to that style. Some things that become important when we're doing element changes is you have various bitmap properties, active bitmap and bitmap. There's bitmap disabled, focused, and pressed. As you can gather, these describe these states. So which image from that source image material gets used, but it's a little bit more than that because you have to define what subsection of that source image gets used. So we're going to look at how do we define those regions. And then inside of there's some margins that we can use. And that's important for image slicing that I'll talk about a little bit later. And a whole bunch of other things that we can try into. But the bitmaps are the most important ones, along with some of the margins and positions to get a feel for what things look like. So what we're going to do next is we're going to update the title bar of our Floral Shop Classico. So let me go and bring back one of the designers here. That's the Classico. Let's bring over our Floral Shop one. And so what we want to do is I'm going to actually keep both of these up just to help. And this is one where I'm using another style to kind of give me the appearance I want. So I'm going to pick the Windows Modern style. And one of the things we note when we do this style, that it's quite big. You know, the buttons are bigger. It's a taller title bar than if we go and run our Floral Shop. These are really close together, and the title bar is quite small. So what do we need to do to change that? Well, where that's defined is in the objects. And so we're going to open up this, and in particular, let's go open up the image, form, and title. So if we look at the title, and what you'll see is, oh, here's this is the control elements. Now that we've delved into it, these make up the different pieces for it. So the title itself is this dotted rectangle. And if we do find the corresponding version over here, when we go to the title, we'll notice that, oh, okay, the title is just the top part of that, and it's got some smaller buttons. Okay, so that's what that's using. And we have various properties that we have here. Like, for example, the height of the title bar is 32, whereas the height over here is just 29. And so what can, let's change that up. So if we change this to be 32, and I could hit enter, you'll note that, oh, the dotted line now goes below that. So we need to fix something up, because that's not going to look right, because the background image it's not filling it as best it should. Then we also can change let me open this up. We go to the caption, and the caption itself is the text that's in there, and that's going to describe where the caption is. And so we're going to match. So the caption height is 31 there. The height over here, we can make this one 31. You can see how it's changing that down as well. SK caption. The top, let's change the top of that to match. So that shifts it up a little bit. And or we could just change that to the client Change it like that. That fits in there. Then we'll go to, let's see, client. All right, looking at my notes here, client height and client top, which we did. Top of 0, so we're set on that. And then the next thing is we go to the sys buttons and find the button close. And if we look at the button close, we've got drilled down into here, so caption, sys buttons. It's kind of interesting how this is all structured and how it's nested. But what we're looking at is the width is 46 for the defaults, nice and wide. We don't need to necessarily make it that big. We can go ahead and make this 40 instead of 22, and we'll see that that's over. But we're going to go and change the left property to match. And so, actually I will make that the 46 so I can do these numbers right. Match that with the 254. And you can see now that the buttons are bigger. And we go and we'll do it for the next button as well. We'll do the button max. So the button max we're going to change to be 46. The left for that one is going to change to 210. We'll do the restore, again 46. And I'm doing this quickly just so that we can get a good view for 166. You could tweak and change other ones as you go through. So we'll look at the min one, change that to 46, and change its left to be 122. And we're moving those along. And then button help. And I'm only going to do the 100% ones. There's other ones that you would want to do that are larger. Everything scales up. And then finally this becomes 78. And the final thing is let's fix up our title bar here. And so if we go to the title bar and the active bitmap and we open that up and we can see, okay, where is it getting its active bitmap? Well, it's a little bit harder to see in the bounds here, but let me zoom this in more detailed, and now we can get a view of where it's getting the title bar from. And so we can control the different points of it. So you click the right mouse button to do the lower right and the left button to do the upper left. And so you would go and click on the section that you want that to be covered. And so we can go ahead and put that at the various level that we want. Go ahead and apply that and make the change. Let me go ahead and save this, give this a little run, and now you can see that we actually have a taller and more spread out title bar, which actually works quite well. So that's a way we can control the elements. There's a ton of different elements in each of these different sections. So as you can imagine, it becomes very tedious to go through every control element and change it and tweak it if you're doing something completely custom. But it's quite powerful that it's there. A couple things to note whenever you're editing these like the title, any active bitmaps or regular bitmaps. So regular bitmap is the version that's not selected. So if it's not active, that's why you have two versions in there. Sometimes as you get to higher resolutions, these don't, you'll get distortion that happens. So you have to kind of work with clicking on it. I wish you could type in the coordinates to do it really quickly if you knew what they were. Like these are all in a row, so they're all going to have the same top and bottom. I'm just shifting the X coordinate along. You can't really do that. So there's room for improvement for all of those. All right, let's continue on. So if you really wanted to create a custom style, then there's some things you want to consider, and I've mentioned these in passing, but we're kind of listing them down on the screen here. Is you're going to start with a new style, not copy from an existing one. Although when you create a new style, you basically get everything that's in one of the other styles. It's just not named anything, and it's got very basic settings for it. But the key thing is you will want to spend some time thinking about your source material and organizing it in a way that makes sense. And that's one of the things that I've done with all the raised styles that you saw in the dialogue. Is there's source material for each color style, each theme, and they're all organized in the same way, so that when you go to change them or to customize which one, it's easier to set up. I highly recommend using vector artwork to produce your PNG images. And the reason for that is you will undoubtedly need to tweak it. The circle you first make for a radio button isn't big enough. You need it to be 1 pixel larger, or 2 pixels smaller. Having to erase a raster image and then recreating it becomes very tedious, whereas if it's a vector based, you can do that. One little side note, that if you are using the Adobe products, I love Illustrator when it comes to vector artwork. It's got some really better tooling for vectors designs. However, Adobe Illustrator does not export PNGs as well as Photoshop does. For example, you have a vector circle and you export it in Illustrator. It's not symmetrical in its anti-aliasing when it creates the transparency for a PNG. In Photoshop it is. So I use the less functional vector-based art designs inside of Photoshop to do the PNG work. It does work better, although a little tedier. One of the techniques that I will do is, if you're doing new source images, you have to go through and update all of those objects. For example, I showed part of it, but if we were to open up, say, let's see here, what do we got here? Where's the radio button, for example, and you go to the radio button, check state, and now you have all of these bitmaps that you need to open up and go find, and then create the border around it. But there's no frame around the radio button because it's curved. So how do you know where you need to click and put the bounding rectangle on it? In my artwork, I create a layer that has guidelines, actual lines in the image that I can hide and show, and I use that to guide and mark my clipping rectangle regions inside the designer. Then I go and take away the guides, regenerate the PNG file, update it in the source images. I don't have to go back and change these. It'll pick up the new image, whatever's behind it. So that's a very helpful little tip when you're working with multiple source images. I already mentioned that. The removable guidelines, use the zoom feature for selecting in the regions. One thing I mentioned before is if image slicing, and if you're familiar with that, it's a way to take an image and support clean resizing of that image. And it does so by sectioning the image into 9 sections. The corners are always rendered as is, so there's no change or transformation that's done on those. The sides and the top and bottom are stretched in one direction only. So the sides, left and right, are stretched vertically. So they're tiled vertically. So the border always remains the same, and it will be any height that you want. The opposite is true for the top and bottoms. And then the client area in the middle of the tic-tac-toe grid is stretched to fill as you stretch that. So this is how Windows and Mac and Android all do like multi-size rendering of an image based on a source image. And it allows us to have the curvature look good for these controls. To set this up inside of the Bitmap Style Designer, we end up using, and we can find if we go to the button, for example, the button face, and if you open up the button and scroll down to it, you notice that there's some curvature on it. And I'm going to take it away and cancel. But that curvature, well, we need that slicing line to be like right here and right here and then over here and so forth. Well, that is defined by the margins of that image. So, and again, you have to have the same margins for all of your images for the buttons, the various states, but that's why they pick it in 7. So it's 7 in gives you the different lines all the way around. So the curvature of the button will remain. If you provide a new source image and you do the test and the buttons look weird, like they're painted wrong, check your margins, make sure you're doing the image slicing correctly. That's where that comes from. So a couple things when you're talking with higher DPI, when you go to some of those elements, corner sizes in your source images need to be bigger. When you're going with a 200%, like if you're doing a checkbox with rounded corners, the checkbox itself is going to be bigger based on your 100% scale. You're going to scale that up to 150 and 200%, but you also need to scale the radius of your curve, because that grows as it scales. The same thing with image slicing margins. Obviously, if you're doing 200%, you can't use the same 7 to do the curvature. You really need to use 14. And so you'll see those changes into it. Same thing with line thicknesses. Line thickness needs to double up from 100% to 200%. This is one of the problems, that the reason why Windows, when you run it at 200% or 250%, everything looks washed out. That's because all of the borders that are used for all the controls are still just 1 pixel wide, because they don't create a new source image that has a 2 pixel wide border when you're running at 200%. Mac does, and iOS and Android does. So when you run at those or higher DPIs, the borders still look the same weight. Windows looks washed out because they don't supply or provide a way to give a different source image for the control when you run at 200%. So if that's, there's nothing we can really do about that until Embarcadero decides to add in high DPI versions of all of the controls, including the list box backgrounds, the edit borders, and so forth. Just real quick, I'll take a moment to show, went too far. One of the things that we've been working, yeah, I'll go and save that. Let me open up the Raise Frost. The Raise Frost is our light style. This is a purely custom style from the ground up. Has a very consistent hot tracking. It's inspired by Windows 11, but glyphs and graphics are much cleaner to read. There's a common theme through the whole piece. We have different highlights, highlighting active buttons. All the menus follow the same style. Tab controls, all the styling is fit in. What's nice is that we support both light and dark styles. So if I were to go and change this to the Raised Graphite blue, here is the dark version of that same style, and so it has a different look and feel for supporting those. And of course, what you saw is there's different colors for each of those. So that's something you can go to the Raise Software website for more information about what the different styles look like and different coloring. And what's kind of neat is when you use the per control styling, you can use like blue by default, but still load up a purple button that if that's what you want to highlight, you can do that. So with that, that's the breadth of my material for this session. You can go to my Delphi by Designs website. In the download section, it has the material. It has that color impact style. The floral shop is in there with the new images are embedded inside the style. If you have any questions about creating custom VCL styles, please feel free to use the contact information on the screen. And I will now be around to answer any questions you might have right after the presentation. Thank you very much.
Fantastic session. I really enjoyed that. And as usual, lots of questions and very little time. But even so, we're going to give it a go. Ray is joining us live today for questions and answers in the studio. Hello, Ray.
Hello. Good morning.
Oh, you're that way. There you go. I can never point in the right direction. I have no career in TV for me. There you go. Excellent. Thanks very much. And actually, we did get a lot of questions because it's day 3 and that's how it works. But what we did get, let me just pull them up. Hold on 1 second. This is from Patrick Prematin, who is an MVP and our super question answer. And he's French, and so he always says that our sessions are he's English learning. He's at English school. So, but what he's saying there is he definitely, this was the how to create your personalized styles was needed, and I absolutely agree. I think the session was exactly that. It was, how to create a style that you personalize. And do you know what? I say this every time. I've been around in Delphi for a long time, and I think I know what I'm doing. But every time I see one of your sessions, I'm like, "Oh wow!" So congratulations. I really appreciate it, me personally, and I think a lot of other people as well. Was there anything you spotted in the questions? Because I know that our guests can't always reply to anything. I don't think we had any specific questions, but
no, nothing that I saw. One of the things I do like when I put together a session like this, one is, as you said, that styles have been around for a long time, and most people have relied on the ones that are built in. They get shipped with the product, or there's a couple commercial options out there that you can pick up and try out and so forth. But one of the things, like I'm sure a lot of other developers and certainly companies that have developers and they want their own branding and they're trying to come up with, oh, I like the Adobe Illustrator and, Creative Cloud suite of applications. Could I mimic that using a VCL style? Or you look at any, like even Office or others, there's a lot of apps that are becoming more styled. And to convey branding, to convey information, everybody's trying to go with dark styles now, just because it's very popular. It's some people really like it. It's a more soothing experience than the white contrast. I kind of can go both sides. Kind of depends on which mood I'm in at the moment. But one of the things that I really wanted was, all right, what are the gaps? What are the gotchas if you want to go down this road? Because I've done the similar talks of customizing your VCL apps with styles. Mm-hmm. And that was initially, it started from the component writer's point of view. So how do I, as a component writer, support styles in my app? And there's a certain set of restrictions and guidelines you got to be aware of. But then the next one is like, well, what if I wanted to tweak this a little bit? And that's the common one is I'm just going to take an existing style that's good enough and color it to match more of what we want, hence the floral shop example. But really where this culminated, this session was I had a case where, I wanted to make this from scratch. And so I basically did that, like from a brand new style, not taking any image from anything else. Like if I wanted to provide those images, what do I need to do? And so that was what I tried to explain inside of, okay, I initially used Illustrator to do my graphics because I want to resize it because of high DPI. Like certain sets of images, you need to make different resolutions. Well, I don't want to hand paint every PNG image for that. The problem I ran into there was that Illustrator does not export PNG curves as good as Photoshop does. So I literally had to transfer all of my vector design in Illustrator to the vector equivalents in Photoshop to render the PNGs out of it. And you
have a tool for your tool.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, initially I had it a shared document. I opened up a Photoshop file that linked to the Illustrator one, and it worked. But it was like, okay, this is a little much, a little ridiculous. But there's the key things if you are going down that road. I knew from the get-go I was going to support multiple colors.
Right.
Just because I was thinking kind of like, well, if I'm going to do all this work, I think we could probably make a product out of it. And let me do all of the colors, a good sampling of it, and then go through and come up with a strategy of how to create the images. And if I need to tweak it, because that's the big thing, is you go and tweak it. Well, now you have 14 style files that need to be updated. And so again, every one of them is all done consistently so that it's just tweaking some settings. But it was an interesting experience to do all that. It's
a frustrating experience as well, because I have done it myself. And if I had hair, I wouldn't have any by now because I'd ripped it out. But I think you made a good point as well about the branding, because we can, we provide, obviously, we being Embarcadero, we provide a number of styles. And if you have a paid version rather than the community version, you get some more styles. But, let's say, give a classic example of someone whose branding is quite extreme, and that's Google. They have that multicolored, a simple color scheme,
Yep.
but actually there's going to be no style that fits that exactly. And if
Right.
your company, there are plenty of companies out there, they've got the opposite. They've got like a monochrome branding, but it's a very specific, they've gone off and paid some designer thousands to come up with a single color, But of course, you want your app to fit in with that, so that if you've got a company logo at the top, it looks like it's homogenous and all one thing. And I think that was a very good point about what you made, that there may be styles out there, but sooner or later, if you write enough apps or you're getting serious about it, understanding
it's definitely something to entertain. And the continuation for it is that by finding the gaps, like, okay, is this an Embarcadero gap or is this a Microsoft gap? For the longest time, I was trying to figure out why doesn't, when I go to 200% resolution for Windows on my machine, why does everything look so washed out? Well, It's because the lines of all the windows are still just 1 pixel wide. And so that's just because of the way they've done their styling. Now you go to the Mac and Mac OS. Well, when you go to 200% on a Retina display, the lines are double thick. And so you still have the same weight. And so part of it is like, well, Embarcadero, there's nothing that would prevent you from adding in the ability to have high DPI graphic values for every style element, including the form borders, for example. And so that if you did go to 200%, you could actually have your form rendered with a double wide border. Right now, that's not supported, but that's certainly an enhancement down the road that I would like to see. So even though Windows necessarily isn't doing it right, Embarcadero could kind of fix it and make our high DPI versions of our apps look even better.
Yeah, and that's absolutely it. And I'm a big fan of styles. I think it's one of the things that actually differentiates Red Studio. When we've got the Python guys who are doing, Python apps with the FMX, Delphi FMX libraries and things like that, we show you how you can take one of those styles and then use it in your Python app. So now you've got a magical Python app that looks fantastic as well. So we don't want to promote it too much, but hey, we're here for the developers, not necessarily the sales. Okay, well,
you have another session to do, and I will join you a little later this afternoon for another follow-up. And good luck with the rest of the event.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ray, and I'll speak to you later.
All right, very good.
Thank you.